Good morning for those of you that are on the West Coast. I'm Susan Promise. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Academic Emergency Medicine Education and Training. And we appreciate the opportunity for all of you to get together with us for this virtual reviewers workshop. Hopefully this is the beginning of many of these. We hope to do more throughout the year. But most importantly, this is really a thank you also to all of you for your volunteering to help the journal in the peer review process. So what I'd like to do before I kind of get into a brief overview here is I'd like to introduce our decision editors who are on the call. I'm just going to call them out. Maybe they can kind of wave their hand and say hello. The first is Jeff Siegelman. He's going to be actually leading a discussion here in just a few minutes. Sally Stanton, who's also on with us, as well as Saurabh Khandwal and Esther Chen. Let's see, Teresa Chan. And I think I got, let me make sure I didn't miss anyone. I think I got all of the decision editors that are on the line. And then Taylor Bowen is also on here. He's the person that many of you interact with as messages kind of go back and forth from us. So I'm going to now share a PowerPoint presentation here. So give me a second. Alrighty. Can everyone see that screen? I just want to make sure you guys can all see. Thumbs up. Great. Perfect. So a little bit of an overview of how we're going to spend the next hour and a half. I'm going to start with a brief kind of update on the journal, where things are right now with us. And then Jeff Siegelman is going to do an overview, kind of high level, how to review a manuscript. And then all of you received a manuscript when you registered for this session. And we're going to move into breakout groups with decision editors in all the breakout groups to facilitate a discussion on that manuscript. And then we're going to come back together after that session, and Teresa Chan is going to lead a session on kind of lessons learned. So an overview on our submissions for this year, just to kind of give you a look at the trajectory the journal's had. If you look at this graph, you'll see when the journal opened in 2016, we had around 100 original manuscripts submitted during that calendar year. And then obviously a portion of those revised. And you can see that we have really grown dramatically. And this is kind of an estimate of where we expect we'll be for 2020. This graph looks at our original submissions as well as revised submissions from the beginning in August 2016 to where we are now. We took a hit from COVID just like everyone else, but I think then people really started to spend some time writing, because you can see our submissions have really skyrocketed the last few months. This is going to be a record-breaking year. Our average time from when a individual submits a manuscript to getting a first decision on that manuscript is 25 days. We're pretty proud of that turnaround time. So thank you to all of you for doing timely reviews. It really helps us to get information out to the authors rapidly. And then as far as our acceptance ratio, our percent is about just under 40% of the manuscripts are accepted. And here's a breakdown this year for 2020 of kind of how it all works out from accepted manuscripts. Eventually, it's about 22.6, immediately accept. You guys can read the numbers. But the bottom line is there are manuscripts that we don't accept, and about 20% of manuscripts I will review, and I may say no to them and not even send them out for additional review. Or I may send it to a decision editor and say, I'm not sure about this. What do you think? Should we send it out for peer review? So we do that, but the majority of manuscripts are going out to review. Oops, sorry. Sorry, that one went too fast. The previous slide was a breakdown of the types of manuscripts that we're accepting, and not surprising to everyone, The most commonly accepted are original contributions, followed by brief contributions. And as you know, our journal has different manuscript types, bedside teaching, innovations. So I encourage you, if you get a manuscript that falls into one of those other categories, to please look at kind of author instructions to make sure that it falls in line with that particular manuscript type. Now, I'd be amiss if I don't talk about COVID-19 because, hey, we're still in the middle of it. So just to give you a sense, we had a call for articles related to COVID-19. That call came out with Wendy Coates, who was acting as the editor-in-chief while I had to take some time away to deal with COVID-19 at my hospital, since I'm the chair of emergency medicine. So that was kind of shepherded through by Wendy. 54 new manuscripts and 29 revised, so a total of 83 that we were managing through the process that were related to COVID-19. I wanted to let you know that the journal is viewed across the world. This is a breakdown of kind of the different areas where academic emergency medicine education and training is viewed in the various different institutions. And you can see that that has grown year over year. So we're now at 5,146 in 2019, and we don't have 2020 data yet. Here's monthly downloads, just to show you kind of the readership of the journal. So kind of comparing 2020, as you can see, it's growing compared to 2019. And this is by country. So just to give you a sense, United States and then Canada this year is kind of the second amount of article downloads. But we have from all over the world: India, China, the Netherlands, Brazil. Here are some of the top article downloads for 2019 and 2020. So you can have a look at those manuscripts. And here is the top Altmetric scores that we have, the top 5 currently. So give you a sense of kind of what the social media network is showing as far as getting attention for our journal. And a little bit more about Altmetric system, if you're not aware. It really looks at kind of the usership and the talking about the article in the media. So social media, Twitter, blogs, etc. So I am going to wrap up my time here and get you back over to our next speaker, and I will talk to you again later on. So thanks for listening in. Again, thanks again for all that you do for the journal. So Jeff, all yours.
Good day, everyone. Good afternoon here in Atlanta. I'm going to take a second here to get my screen up and going. How's that? Thumbs up? Cool. So as Susan said, you know, this is our hope is that this is the first of a number of sessions on reviewer workshops. And our goal today is really to focus sort of on the basics, focusing towards a novice reviewer. You're getting started. How do you even sit down to approach reading and writing a review? So to that end, let's get going. And obviously the meat of this will be in our small groups. We'll have a chance to practice through some of this. But over the next 15 minutes or so, we'll chat through general principles about how to approach a review. We'll think about reading critically and writing persuasively, which comments would be appropriate for the editor only, and then how we think about reviewing your review and getting you feedback about that as well. And just to situate us for a moment, so we're focusing on the reviewer's role here, right? And maybe just take a step back for a second for those who are new to this. When you submit an article to the journal, it'll get reviewed by editorial staff who may request that the author make some formatting changes before it's passed along to the editor-in-chief. Susan will review, and as she said, we'll send it on to us, in the majority of cases, to the decision editors. We'll review again to make sure that the paper's in line with the intention of the journal, and that overall it looks like it could be a good fit, and then we'll send it out to reviewers, to you all. And that's where the bulk of the work happens, right? So we're looking to you, usually 3, sometimes 2 reviewers to really take a critical look at the paper and what its contributions are. Those 3 reviewers send their recommendations back to the decision editor, who will adjudicate among them. Rarely, I would say, do they all agree. And we'll look at the arguments the reviewers make and the recommendations they make in addition to our own opinion, and assign a recommendation. And then accepted articles are sent back to Susan for her final okay. So, and at the heart, right, so this is our goal when we're thinking about which articles should be published in the journal, right? So the critical issue is whether the paper under review advances knowledge on the issue under consideration enough to be published. Perhaps it's a cumbersome way of saying, does this add something meaningful to the literature out there? And we'll talk about how that takes a really reasoned approach. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, though, I wanted to sort of step back and talk about this as sort of an empathetic process, right? And I suspect we've all been through this, and you have a couple roles as the reviewer. First, of course, your obligation to the journal and to science is to take a really critical appraisal of the work, just as a craftsman would, from a macro level and down into the details, looking at it from all angles. And at the same time, we really want you to put yourself in the author's shoes, right? Just as the learners we teach expect feedback to be actionable and constructive, non-judgmental, our authors do too, right? And so think about, as you're writing these reviews, what would it feel like as the author to get that feedback? And how can you make it really actionable in such a way that you can pull them up towards having their manuscript ready for publication? Susan made the point that our average turnaround time is 25 days. That's from submission until first decision, right? And we've talked about all the different steps in that process. So timeliness is another aspect of empathy, I would say. And what we ask of our reviewers is a 2-week turnaround. And for most people, a good review can take 3-4 hours or so once you really get comfortable with the process. So we want you to be honest with us. If when we send you a review request, if you can do it, that's wonderful. Block off time in your calendar in the next 2 weeks to get this done. And if you can't, that's okay too. And there's even ways in the journal to mark yourself as unavailable prospectively, so we don't come knocking when you're not available. So let's dive in a bit. My approach when I first take a look at an article to review is to read it over once through just to get the gist. And then the second read is really for the details. And I have pen and paper or notepad or on the computer open as I go through the second time. But a once over I find often is really helpful to get a sense of it. And again, this is a good time to look at the author guidelines for our journal for the specific manuscript type that you've been assigned to make sure that you're comfortable with what's expected of the author for this type of article. So you've read through, you now have a sense of the article, and you're coming back for the second time through. This is where we really dive into the details. And so to get a bit granular here, I want to take you through some key questions to be asking yourself each time you're reviewing an article. And this will help, as you're thinking about these things, build your argument for the decision you'll make later on. Right, so, and these are really the same tips I would give someone who's writing an article, right? So when you're writing your introduction, your background, what's the problem, right? So there should be a clearly defined gap and a need for the current study that the author addresses. There should be a clearly articulated conceptual framework, right? So what's the prior work and theory that's helping inform the current current research question. And then that question or hypothesis should be clear, testable, and appropriate. And usually that's at the last sentence, the last paragraph of the introduction. And then something I didn't realize when I was first starting to review, but certainly it's true, is that it's up to the reviewer also to look at the references cited and think about how appropriate they are. You're not going to read every paper that they cite, but some things to watch for: is the author only citing their own prior work? Do they have a good representation of prior work supporting the current paper? Is there, for a couple key papers, are they accurately interpreting the reference, or do they, sometimes you can get a sense that they sort of skimmed an abstract, and we want to make sure that the theory that they're basing their work on is sound. So then you move on to the methods, and of course this is going to be the meat of what we do, right? So we're really trying to get at here: do you feel like you could reproduce the study based on the information provided? And do you feel like the authors addressed potential sources of bias as they developed their paper? So I think also, are the methods the best way to address the question? So they think about the research question they asked and the different ways or different study designs that could have been employed. Is what they chose appropriate, or would you have done it differently? And why? Think through all the different sources of bias, right? So a lot of papers that we see will have a survey as as one component of the study, and think through the potential sources of bias there, best practices for developing surveys. And then turn to the analysis. Are the statistical methods used appropriate? Are they correct? Is there anything missing? And we don't expect our reviewers to all be expert statisticians, right? We expect you to have a basic understanding of power and statistical significance and the most common forms of analysis that are done in education literature. But it's also always appropriate to say to the editor, give your opinion on the paper, but say, I didn't feel comfortable with this part of the analysis. I can't comment on that. And honestly, I'd invite, as a theme throughout this, I'd invite you to dialogue with your decision editor whenever questions come up. We'll talk more about conflict of interest later, but it's certainly appropriate for you to send a note to the decision editor and say, this is what I'm thinking, how does that sound? Especially for someone who's a new reviewer. When you're looking through the results, all right, this should be objective findings only, right? And it should be clear and complete. Is there anything that you wish they would have told you that they didn't? It's often harder to think through what's missing from a paper than analyzing what is there. But what else did you need to know from the analysis that they ran to inform the conclusions they're making? And again, this is not the place for the author to have opined on their results, but rather just to present the data as they are. Looking at the figures and tables, same question. Are they clear? Are they appropriate? Do they help? Each table and figure should have an appropriate title. Some require legends or a caption. Do they support and bring clarity to the manuscript? Or are they confusing, and do they befuddle things? And that's really helpful for you to bring back to the authors. And finally, the discussion, right? So this is the time for subjective interpretation of the results by the authors. And the question for you to answer is, are they drawing appropriate conclusions based on their data? One of the most common things we'll give feedback to authors on is that they're overstepping. Their conclusions go beyond what their data support. Are there any alternative explanations for the findings? Can you think of confounders that the authors didn't address? And looking through the limitations that the authors describe, are they adequate? Are there other limitations that you've come up with, looking at the methods that need to be addressed there as well? And importantly, are there any fatal flaws? And sometimes you'll read a paper and the theory will be good, but they just didn't meet the muster with their response rate, or something will be just unfixable, right? And it's important to note that up front. And frankly, it'll save you time, and it'll really be what you'll want to focus the discussion around. So now it's time to decide. And I say decide now because you're going to frame your your whole review around as an argument to support what you've decided. So your options in this journal are three. You can accept the article outright, recommend to revise and reconsider, or to decline. And accept is straight away is exceedingly rare. And I would say if you're going to choose that, it actually makes your job much harder to really justify what was so exceptional about this paper that it's perfect as is. The majority of what we'll see is the other two choices, revise and reconsider, which means there's merit to the study. The design is appropriate. You may expect some modifications to how they're describing the methods, fleshing out some sessions more, or maybe reorganizing their argument. But they don't need any further experimentation to achieve their goals. You should decline if you feel like there's a fatal flaw, or if you feel like the deficiencies that are present can only be remedied with further experimentation, which would merit a decline. And again, if you're having questions about being on the fence there, it's totally appropriate to email your decision editor. So now it's time to write. In general, this is about a page, right? And I'll take you through the structure of this. But again, we really want you to support in detail your publication recommendation. And we want you to be balanced. Again, to that point about empathy. There's something good about this paper. And you know, having gone through a really reasoned analysis of the paper, you can speak to what was done well and then what should be done differently. So your first paragraph of your review is going to be an intro paragraph, a brief recap of the work, maybe a sentence or two summarizing the approach, major findings that the authors report, and where you'll highlight strengths and positives, and you'll give a very brief overview of your major concerns and reservations. More than anything, this conveys to the author that you read and understood their work, and it'll lend credence to what you're about to deliver in the body, where you'll really give the meat of this. And this is a point-by-point detailed review of the major issues, which either make the paper unsuitable for publication or which need to be addressed in revisions. If there is a fatal flaw, you don't need to go parsing out all the small details. Focus your review on that and how the author can improve to that end, and leave it at that. And as all of you know, when you receive your revision request back from a reviewer, you're going to need to respond to them point by point. So it's helpful for the author if you organize your review, grouping common issues together and organizing it along the same lines as the paper is written. And just again, to accept a paper without revision, you must explain in detail why the work is exceptional. It really should be well supported. One note, make sure to focus just on the research. We have copy editors who will work on the spelling and grammar. Some of us have our pet peeves about commas and periods, and I would say don't waste your time on that, unless the writing is so poor that that it's unclear or the message gets lost, and that's worth saying from your standpoint. And at the end of your review, you'll write a conclusion. This should be brief, and actually I would say we don't usually, reviewers won't usually put their decision or their recommendation to publish or not in the body of the review itself, but I would summarize again here what the key issues are, and maybe what the key strengths are as well. There is an option separate from the review comments to be sent to the editor only, which the author won't see, and I'd say that the authors deserve a balanced critique of their article, so very little honestly should go here, if anything. A note about conflict of interest: it's totally appropriate for you to have, if you're a competing researcher, maybe in the same area, it's appropriate for you to still review this article. But if you have financial, personal, or intellectual conflict of interest, I would say discuss that with the decision editor, inviting you before you accept the review. On the other hand, if you're identifying conflict of interest on the author's part somehow, that's worth putting in here, as well as any concerns about plagiarism or previously published work. Finally, you'll send in your review, and as we're collating the different reviews to make a decision on the article, we'll also be thinking about your review itself, and the decision editors will score it 1 through 4, roughly around these criteria. Was it timely, constructive, and professional? Were you able to identify the major strengths and weaknesses of the study design and methods? Did you accurately comment on the author's interpretation of the data and limitations? Did you provide the author with useful suggestions and provide the editors with proper context and perspective to make a decision on acceptance? And again, we're an editorial board full of educators, right? So we're delighted to take your comments and your questions as you're going through. I'd say many of us would also be happy to read a draft of your review before you submit it, and help guide you through the process as much as you need. I'm listing here a reference. Gus Garmel wrote a good overview a number of years ago that would be some good reading beyond this talk. And thanks for your attention. I'm going to turn it over to Saurabh now to get us set up for the breakouts.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So today, I think all of you received the manuscript, and hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at it. We're going to be looking at the manuscript, comparison of active learning techniques, audience response questions versus small group discussion on immediate and long-term knowledge gains. The manuscript was submitted as an original contribution. And again, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, that's okay. Follow the conversation and add to it as much as you can. So for the next part of the session here, we're going to break out into small groups and then kind of go through the manuscript and kind of discuss what entails a review and maybe how we all sort of approach that, and maybe some best practices. And then we'll come back as a larger group, and Teresa will sort of run that large group session to kind of answer any remaining questions, just go through everything that we've learned as in our small groups. So bear with us, and we will get everybody sort of connected to different rooms with different facilitators, and then we can kind of begin.
And Dan Bonaventura is going to start those groups eminently. You'll get a little pop-up that says join the group, and you should join the group. So yeah, who want to kind of volunteer from each of the groups? I'm going to pick on Jeff's group because he's right in the middle of my screen. So Jeff, do you want to summarize, or do you want to see if anyone from your group wants to fall on the sword so that you don't have to within your group? What are some of the things that came up?
That sword has already been thrown. Sean, I think it's ready to go.
All right, let's go. All right, Sean, take it away.
Yeah, happy to catch the sword. So, yeah, so I think it's a pretty well done study. The intro was good. It was solid. It was well organized. It was clear. They had a literature review that was appropriate, and it was clear what their plan was. The methods were clearly reproducible. And we had some comments on the presentation of the results. Some of it is stylistic of how they could have repurposed the tables and whether the diagrams were needed. But overall, the data was there that we needed to interpret the study. The discussion, we felt it could be reorganized a little bit to better state why this study is important and why it needed to be done and why it should be published. We felt that was buried a little bit. The limitations, we had some comments. In particular, there was some drop-off of the long-term education evaluation, and we'd like to hear more about why there was that drop-off and why they thought that happened. We thought probably was the med students most likely, but we don't know that for sure. But overall, we felt there was no fatal flaw. Things were correctable. And it was more a little bit of touch up. We also had some comments about the post hoc power calculation, and we would have liked to have seen that done on the front end, of course, but that is what it is, and they did identify it as a limitation. Also, of course, it's a single center study and small, but that it was the design of the study, and they appropriately identify that as a limitation as well. So all in all, some recommendation for revisions, but I think a pretty good, concise, clear study. I don't know if I missed anything, Jeff.
All right. Okay. Was there a group that differed in their view? Esther, Sora, what do you guys think?
So I could speak up. Our group was very, I mean, we really applauded the authors for doing a randomized study within medical education. We thought that the post hoc analysis was a pretty critical flaw in the study. And we also had a long discussion about the assessment and whether this assessment was really designed to test a difference between these two different teaching formats. So we actually had a lot of questions about the design and the methodology. I mean, we thought it was a really interesting topic. It was really relevant to educators. We're all trying to learn about active learning strategies, but we didn't really feel like this study really was set up to see a difference between these two different formats.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Hey,
Sorry,
Teresa, I'll speak for our group. We were similar to Teresa's group. We felt that, you know, we applauded the authors for, again, doing a study like this. And we love the fact that they added a conceptual framework into the introduction. I think we don't see that a lot, so that was nice. We had some difficulty with whether or not those were the right conceptual frameworks. Constructivism, we questioned that. We questioned the methodology quite a bit. Overall, I think we felt that maybe, and when you look at the details of whether or not we could really reproduce this study, if we read the paper and took that to our own institutions. And then we shared some of the other, we shared some other concerns about sort of whether or not, you know, the type of statistical method used was appropriate, and how it could have been better defined for the readership, so they understood that sort of statistical method a little better. And then there were some parts in the conclusion that were, you know, maybe not perfect as well. But so we talked a little bit about sort of going through the process in detail from beginning to end, and then really sort of looking at the outcome, which is, you know, in the end, do you feel like the study itself is worth disseminating? If it is, how much time do we spend with the authors to get it at a level to where we can get the message out to our readership? Or whether or not the paper is dead in the water from the beginning because of maybe some method flaws that we kind of saw.
All right. I'm going to ask Dina to maybe speak on our group's behalf, and then we'll put Sally's group on notice for the next round. But Dina, do you mind? I think we were a reviewer too. I don't know. Like, I think our group might have been a little bit, like, we thought there were good things, but we spent a lot of time finding some things that we'd like to improve, right? So
yeah, so I think that we identified a few areas where we just sort of had more questions, you know, why this, why did you do it that way? We kind of questioned the topic selection in terms of the didactic sessions that they were done. We weren't sure if those topics, especially ocular trauma, which may be prone to more of a skill session perhaps, if these things, why these were chosen, these particular two, compared to anything else you might do, why they had residents teaching as opposed to faculty, a few questions that just we weren't quite sure what the logic was there. We also had the same concern, I think a couple of other groups mentioned, about if the knowledge gains were really from the sessions or if the knowledge gains were partly because of the post-test that they were given. Even though they weren't given the answers or any explanations, we did talk about the effect of like residents, you know, going to look up a certain thing and learning that way. And so I think overall we were pretty critical of the study. I think that we did applaud like their use of like their statistics, or I think appropriate. And we also questioned some of the conclusions that they had in their discussion in terms of making a little bit of a leap and saying that other literature gave them the ability to say that they had buy-in from their specific group of learners, where we would have liked to see some evidence of that or just take it out altogether.
Thank you. And Sally, do you have someone from your group that could speak up? Sally, you're muted right now.
Sally's been having computer issues.
Oh, there she is. You're working? There she is.
Can you, I don't know. Can you,
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
okay, sounds good. So Philip or Mikhail, do you want to talk about our group? All right.
Hey, it's Philip.
Okay. Go.
Sorry, I've been distracted from the conversation, so I may just be repeating people. You know, we tried to ignore the warts and embrace the pieces of this that were really elegant and nicely configured. It wasn't a survey. It had a clear endpoint. There was sort of an elegant design. It'd be a nice step ladder for a larger study. And if you ignore just the sample size, it was well done. So we saw a clear path to why this might be considered.
I think there must be a problem. Phil, are you there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
I'm just
wanted
curious.
to see. Okay, all right. So yeah, I think that what you're pointing out is good, that it may be good early work. Now, there are some times in which, as a decision editor, I might see your comment then, Phil, from your group and say, maybe this is better as a brief report or something like that, right? So because it is early work, it does have some limitations to it. It is single center. Definitely sometimes, I mean, it's just fair warning as a reviewer that you may think that it's a fantastic paper and some other people might see different rationale behind it, right? So definitely, I think that that's something I've seen is that early work sometimes gets suggested to be modified to fit into our brief report kind of format. So, and I think that's okay, because that's what brief reports are meant to do, is to report early findings in a study that may not be perfect, but is a good step in the right direction and has many good attributes. All right. Okay, so is there any group that I missed? I think I've gone through all the groups now. And so maybe I'll just put ask all the editors to make sure they leave their cameras on, and we can go ahead and do a little bit of a couple of minutes of Ask Me Anything. Are there questions from the general audience? You can type them and I'll read them if you want to send them to me, or if at all you have in general kind of some some thoughts on the review process, we'd love to hear those thoughts as well. Okay, I have a question here. Thank you very much. How does one become a decision editor? All right. That's probably, there's different paths of different journals, but what I would say is if you're just getting started off in this path, then one of the great ways to get noticed to be a decision editor is probably to engage in great reviews and then also do some science on your own, right? So that would be two things that I foresee that mostly across all the different editors that I've worked for, and a big part of it, of getting noticed as a potential decision editor, is actually to be a really good reviewer. So I think that that's not a plug to do just reviews, but it is something that where you want to think about, you know, if you're going to see yourself being on the editorial board for a journal, you might want to preferentially pick one or two journals that you tend to never say no to, so that you can get noticed by that editorial board. But I will kick it over to Susan, who's on the call, to kind of put her perspective on how we find decision editors within our group.
Yeah.
So Susan, yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Teresa. And Melissa, thanks for that question. I think, you know, as you heard Teresa kind of outline, it really is I, as the editor-in-chief, really look for people that are willing to dedicate their time and talents. So first they have to demonstrate their talents and then be willing to dedicate the time. Our editorial board gets together, all of the decision editors, once a month for a call. we have emails that go back and forth. And then we have certain decision editors that share various types of expertise with the team. So I'm always open and willing to consider other people to add, because as you can see, our journal is growing in leaps and bounds as far as the number of manuscripts. In fact, we are likely going to go to, not next year, but the year after, publishing every other month instead of quarterly, plus having a special issue. So there's plenty of work to be done if we have people that are interested. And really, it's showing the aptitude to critique and to really manage papers as they come through, because it does take time. I mean, it's amazing the work that everyone on this board has done. I'm really grateful to them. And as I said to you guys as reviewers, but that's it. There's no magic. It's really, having the talent and most importantly, the time that you want to volunteer for this important mission.
All right, so there's another question about the feedback to reviewers. And so, Susan, there's been some controversy over this. We have discussed it at the editorial board meeting. Our friends and colleagues at Wiley had released people's reviewer scores to them. And this is actually something that AEM and AEM Education and Training have both used this mechanism in the past. But this year it seemed to become more of a discussion point. And so there is the scoring rubric, and I think for a while our journal wasn't sending out kind of copies of all the other reviews to reviewers. And so I think that there's been some changes that we've walked through. But Susan, do you want to maybe field a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, I apologize if anyone took the feedback in a negative way, because it wasn't meant that way at all. But after the comments that we kind of read in social media, actually, is how some of this came out, and as well as decision editors having faculty come and talk to them, we are now going to be sending out, as Teresa described, all the reviewers for any particular manuscript will get a copy of each other's reviews, so you can learn from one another. I think it's helpful to see different people's perspectives. And I'm also working on trying to give you a better understanding about what a 1 is and what a 4 is. That hasn't really been well delineated. It's more just kind of a gestalt of the people reviewing. So that's, I guess, the update at this point in time. And I would say if you ever are looking for some feedback, if you're just struggling with something, I think our team is willing to answer that. Obviously, we can't do that for every single paper, but please know that we're here to help and support you, because we appreciate all the great work that you do.
Yeah, if someone ever asks me, I think, and I'm sure this is the case with most of the other reviewers, if you write us an email and saying, hey, can I get some feedback on my review? I think A, we'd fall out of our chair because no one ever asked that, and B, we'd be happy to write something in response once we actually recovered from the concussion that we got from falling out of our chair. Definitely, I do think that if this is something that you're interested in carving out as a niche, if you're gravitating towards this, then yeah, be hungry like that and go ahead and email us, because most people don't. And so if you want feedback about your review, I mean, I get those requests maybe once a quarter or so, and I'm always happy to give feedback. I would say that maybe I go above and beyond, and I've already told Susan that sometimes I do this, is that if someone writes an exceptional review, I'll shoot them an email, just reply all to, one of the things that happens, and just tell them that was an ace review. And if someone is in clear need of more formative stick handling, then sometimes I write a separate private email to say, hey, can we chat sometime about reviews and stuff like that. So I try to do that when I can, especially if it's a more junior person, right? So definitely, I think that we all try to do support all of you however we can, but definitely reach out and ask us, because most of us are happy to give advice.
So we just have a couple minutes left. Teresa, do you have anything else you want to add, or I may do some closing comments and we can wrap up?
I think that you just some closing comments. I think that each of the breakout rooms had a slightly different feel to it. So definitely, I think the take home is going to be ask for feedback if you want it. Go ahead and tell us, you know, who you are and frame a little bit of your vantage point when you're coming at the review, because some of us then know if you're more of a clinician reviewer or you're like someone who's a methodological expert. That helps us understand things. Go ahead and put some pros, but also some, you know, put the cons alongside the pros so that people, you know, who are reading it have empathy for the people on the other side. And like Jeff was saying earlier, if you can't do the review, tell us hard and furious and fast. We'll keep asking you, don't worry. So go ahead and tell us to decline, because we'd rather have a speedy decline than wait 2 weeks waiting for someone to not tell it to time out on the system. Right. So those would be kind of like the take homes, I think, from what I've heard today. And I'll kick it over to Susan for closing remarks.
Yeah. So again, I want to end with a really big thank you and a huge round of applause to all of you guys for all the great work that you do. And a real big shout out for the decision editors who really give tirelessly to the cause of this journal. I'm really proud to be able to work with and for all of you to really raise up medical education in the eyes of the Society of Academic Emergency Medicine. So thanks again for all that you do. And if we can ever be of assistance, let us know. And if you get to the point where you want to potentially be a decision editor, you know where to find me. So have a great rest of your day. And hopefully we'll come out on the other end of COVID and get to meet in person sometime soon. So see you later. Bye-bye.